my brother, James, Saywhatsales, Buckley. We've known each other for years, and we've been on like probably a ton of podcasts together. So
Podcast events, bro.
events,
we go back. Let's
everything.
make the magic.
Yeah, we always talk about life, which is a thing about me. I don't know if it's just my energy or what, but it was interesting. Like I always really connect with folks on that level. We end up talking about those things, which, you know, ultimately I think are the things that matter the most in life, right? Like, don't get me wrong, right? You have to care about your career. We got to pay bills and have those sort of earthly things. But I just think the human connection
You said
is
it,
like
earthly. You said it. I think
yeah, it is.
I think you are like me and many others in my circles that have a larger picture mentality. We feel that we would be foolish to not focus on the bigger picture that's out there, the universe, creation, the larger factors, and how
the
they
divine,
impact, the divine, right? How does it impact our growth? We're very interested in this.
dude. Yes. You know, and in fact, I would say like my passion at this point, I've been doing, tech and startups and entrepreneurship for about 22 years. But I would say at this point in my life, my biggest passion is actually around the spiritual side of life, the esoteric, the divine, those things like that.
I've always felt that way about our relationship. We end up in those conversations naturally every time we hang out.
Certainly. But I think like it's interesting because my wife, she's like, we've known each other since we were 14. And let me tell you, when I was 14, 15, you're from the area, Miami, growing up in this area, you get into the streets.
You're a wild human at 15.
Yeah, you are a wild human to say the least. And so I was getting in trouble in school and the whole nine, right? Like, and she knew me back then and we were like, friends, but, I was a troublemaker, right? And I sort of thought about myself that way. But what's interesting when we reconnected, because again, we'd been friends for 20 something years, right? And we were having dinner and I remember we were chatting and now this is like 2.5 years ago, our first date, right? As non-friends. And she was like, you know what? I always felt that you were this spiritual person, even since you were a kid. Yeah. And I looked at her and I was like, how? Like I was literally, I'm not going to say all the stupid shitty stuff I was doing back then as a teenager, but you know the deal. And I looked at her and I was like, that really touched me because I was like, despite the things that we might do externally, like people can still feel your energy, right? So I just thought that was interesting when you said that about, our relationship. That really kind of came up for me.
Perception is everything, man. And the way that she perceived you was that way because of the demeanor and the aura, the energy that you give off. It's very in touch, right? It's not aloof to the larger things out there that impact your growth, both personally and professionally.
Well, you probably know Scott Britton from Troops.
The name is familiar. Yeah.
So he's one of the co-founders of Troops, which now is part of Salesforce, and he's been in the ecosystem for a while. And shout out to him. Like his whole thing now, post exit, and I think this is something that he just given like the content he's put out, and then we're personal friends now. We've actually gotten much closer, since he's really dived into the whole spiritual world. In fact, he's got this like podcast and publication that is all about like the spiritual world and consciousness and psychedelics and health and all this stuff, which is super interesting.
Peace within is a doorway to growth overall in any way, in any facet that you need it in. Peace within must be achieved if we are to accomplish growth.
Amen. Well,
that's it. That's the podcast. We're done here.
That's it, right? Well, actually, I know there was a list of stuff that we were chatting about that we could, kind of share with the audience here. And, our audience are go-to-market professionals, and that's kind of the professional side of our life, right? But why don't we kind of dig into knowing my why? And of course, this is within the context of professionals out there listening. But as I've said before, and I was on with a really great spiritual coach recently, who's actually a business coach. you know, there is no separation between personal life and business life, especially these days when we're in the physical, the same physical space. So I just wanted to caveat that. Of course, that's my experience and my perspective on it. But how do you start to determine my why? And what do you mean by that? Knowing my why?
Yeah. So shout out to Simon Sinek. The first time I was exposed to this concept of knowing your why was because of him, right? Know your why was his book that really like put him on the map. And I remember at the time I was still teaching people on my own, like naturally as like a side hustle for like how I was doing business development, how I was prospecting new business consistently. And I kept getting all of these messages that were like, yo, this changed everything for me. And thank you so much for spending 15 minutes with my team this morning. They were more productive today than they were in the last 6 months. We hit a new record for activity after that meeting you attended with us. This became my why. How much good karma can I push out to this community so that every day I have 2, 3, 4 of these messages from people that I've helped? If this is my focus, then the opportunities will come as a side effect to that focus. And man, when I tell you that's exactly how it happened, that's how it happened. I just started scheduling things that made sense because what I knew and the value that I could share would probably change the perspective of these humans that I was going to do it with and talk about it with. It became very organic and very real. And before I knew it, it was all coming back to me and I couldn't stop it. It was like a train. And that's, shortly after that is when I got the offer from John Barrows to join the team. And this is how he pitched me on the job. This is how I knew the job was for me. He said, the way you make people feel is amazing. You want to do it with me? I said, sign me up, man.
Wow. Shout out to John. Absolutely. You know what? Like, yes. Obviously, I don't have to tell you this because you probably heard it, but like that was the first time where I sat there and just thought about how you make me feel as a friend and as a professional. And shout out to John for recognizing that, for having that awareness and that depth to be able to identify that.
Yeah. He pitched me on the job. I was standing in my backyard when it happened. I took the call. We had been friends for a while, so I kind of saw it coming. Plus, I had met Chris Merrill, who is our partner, the founder of Sell Better, which is like now the media company that broke off from Jay Barrows. And man, like all of our vibes were the same. We all wanted to focus on the same thing. How do I help as many people as possible? Whatever that might cost us.
Yeah.
We were willing to do it. And that turned into something completely unexpected.
And I think like my perception of like the content that John's putting out now, there seems to be that quality to it. John, I met John, I don't know, 12 years ago or something. And, at a Salesforce event or something. And he was known as
that's how everybody meets John.
Yeah. Right. And he was known as that like sales trainer, sales coach, that kind of thing. And it was all about, best practices and training and very, business oriented content. And it feels like the last couple years, I've just seen that quality, that internal, that depth, that spiritual almost component or quality to it.
It has become that very naturally for him because I believe that his goal is just like mine, right? We want to help other people achieve success. Success is a term that lots of people use differently. It looks different for lots of people. What does it take to achieve success? Well, it takes resources, guidance, community. It takes a village. You've heard that phrase before, right? We wanted to provide that. John can't be John and all over, right? It can't just be John. So Sell Better was born from the necessity to have an engine that puts more out there to help sellers on the front lines be the best they possibly can be and change their lives, because that's what it did for all of us. So we started to create those resources. I'm gonna give you this. Here's a link to some great resources. Here. I don't know if people can see this. Here it is, but it's sellbetter.xyz/people/James-Buckley. So that's the link. It's right there in the chat.
Awesome.
There are a ton of great resources at that link that anybody can leverage. 100% free. Go get it.
James, why do you think that so many, and I can't say all of them, but so many of like the people who I know, just given, you know, my experience in the last 2 decades in the startup game and that whole deal, I've seen so many people make, you know, enormous amounts of money, you know, generational wealth, richest people in the world kind of stuff. Yet I see this, there's like 3 paths that they end up taking that I've seen so far. Now, again, this is just my subjective experience and opinion. Number 1, they become lost and like maybe their misery is either continues or doesn't have now something to distract itself with, like building business in the pursuit of financial success, because they've reached it and maybe they realize, crap, that wasn't, it was great, don't get me wrong, but like that wasn't the magic pill. B, they dive straight into like a very spiritual experience and kind of just go, you know what, that wasn't it, I'm gonna, you know, this is it. And like, and I don't want to say that that's my buddy Scott's experience, because I can't really say that definitively, but he certainly has pivoted into that. And I think you've seen that. Or you just see some folks who just continue to keep their heads down and don't, you know, and then work even harder and like just keep thinking, oh, maybe it's not $100 million, but it's $1 billion. I've seen that so many times. Oh, it's like, but I'm not a billionaire yet. Now I got to reach that $1 billion. So why do you think that's happening?
Yeah. So the reason for the latter, the third one that you mentioned there, is that somewhere along the way, social media as a whole grabbed onto this concept of millions and billions of dollars being the standard. Somewhere along the way, we as a society agreed with the big marketing engines that run social media platforms that if I wasn't a millionaire or living up to the expectations that somebody else in my life has, I wasn't successful. I can tell you, this shift really changed what our goals looked like. I remember when I first started in SaaS, let me just put that into perspective for you. When I first started in SaaS, I was coming out of being a cook. I was a cook for 15 years at restaurants everywhere. I was lucky to clear $27,000, $30,000 a year if I was lucky. And that was really busting my hump every night till like 3 in the morning. I had no social life, right? I move into SaaS and suddenly that's my base pay. Plus I have this commission opportunity. Everything about my life changed. Suddenly, the $30K that I worked my ass off to earn every year became table stakes, and it was all about what I could make in commission. This, of course, was a completely new world to me. How did this translate? Well, I believe that we set a bar for ourselves internally. Everybody has a different level of what they want. Some people are willing to settle, and some people aren't. Some people quite literally reach a goal and remember that goal, but continue to set new ones. My goal when I first started in SaaS was I wanted to be able to take me and my family out to dinner without having to check my bank account first to make sure it was okay. I still do this. Even though I passed that goal many moons ago, I still remember what I came from. So the humility I think that we develop is what keeps that in check. The other 2 reasons that you have is that once you reach a certain level of success, you search for the larger picture. You and I are in that spiritual phase of our lives right now because success is about more than money to us at this point in our professional growth. We're after the personal growth now. We got the lifestyles we want. So we want the spiritual growth, the emotional growth, the personal growth is what we're after now. And then the first piece that you mentioned, the one where they dive all into business and they become wildly successful. But at what cost? These people are often extremely wealthy and quite successful in the perception of their audience. But when you talk to them one-on-one, when you talk to them personally, or when the shit hits the fan and it all comes out in public, it turns out they're often quite miserable. Yeah. Nowhere is there a better example than Robin Williams. Top of his game, took his own life. Nobody would have thought this. The reason why this happens is because we're human beings. We're all very diverse, and we don't know how to navigate our professional and personal growth at the same time. So we typically lean to one side or the other. I've heard it said, and this is a common phrase, and I know you've heard it too. If your professional life is going well, your personal life is likely in shambles. And if your professional life is going well and you're being promoted every year, your personal life probably sucks and you might be alone, right? You might be celebrating by yourself with that glass of wine in your big fancy house, but have no one to share it with. This is a very common thing. So which piece of the pie do we need to fall into? My experience has taught me that if you find that balance and you learn to ride that fence between personal and professional growth, you will always be happy and you'll always be kind of right on the edge of success, forever moving the goalpost.
Balance, right?
Yeah.
That whole thing.
I talk about the fence, George. We've had this conversation. I live on the fence. On one side of the fence, there's all these people that want to be where I am, and I'm always lifting them up on the fence so they can get on my level. And on my other side of the fence, there's all these people that I want to be where they are. So I'm always reaching up so they can help me onto their fence. And if I just keep riding the fences, I'm always winning.
You know what's interesting though? Like, I was chatting with a friend of mine, I would say about 2 years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago. And you know, he was like valued at $1 billion in personal wealth, etc. And I didn't find him to be that happy, you know, and he had all the accolades, you know, the whole resume. And, you know, this is a stereotypical thing, right? We've heard this before, but we still get sucked in at times. I mean, I don't want to generalize. I can speak for myself, right? I can see that happening less these days than before. But certainly still diving into what I call the, you know, the illusion of that, of the, but still, like I see, you know, all these friends who are like super, you know, on paper well off, but like, you know, they got more gray hair than than they did a couple of years ago. They just don't have that quality, that energy of stillness and happiness, stillness, right? Peace, that quality. Yet we still, I think, you know, dive into or default back to the, you know, that conditioned behavior of wanting to, like, you know, again, pursue that.
So you called it conditioned behavior, but it's actually conditioned reverence. I think we revere those that are in a position we desire to be in. There's a few examples that I can think of. I don't like to name names or throw people under the bus, but there's always individuals that you see outside of your circle and you say, I want to be as successful as these humans. I want to be as adaptable as these people and be able to grow all the time. And we see those people and constantly compare ourselves to them. This is demeaning to our ability to grow at our own rate. Most of the time when we compare ourselves to those people, you can trace it back to some very key moments that they were able to capitalize on. Look for your moments. Don't look at that person. That person had their own moments.
I love it. You know, what came from a variety of those experiences that I just alluded to was this thing that happened, or this question internally, which was, well, what do I want? And resounding, like the answer was peace and acceptance of what I have today and the journey. Now I don't think that means, oh, you know, I'm going to stop working, or I'm going to stop trying to pursue, you know, different levels of financial success, or, you know, societal success or whatever. But I think it does mean that there is this understanding that is not going to be it by itself, right? So that I have to have a more well-rounded experience, and that I have to enjoy the journey along the way. Now, that also means, in my opinion, that you have to accept the moments. I was texting a friend of mine earlier today. I was like, hey, how are you, brother? You good? You know, and I was like, you know what? Do you ever feel insecure and emotional? And he was like, yes, absolutely, all the time. You know, he was telling me, and as men, sometimes I think, you know, those types of conversations opening up is certainly stigmatized, and we're supposed to be tough and all that stuff, right? But the acceptance of those peaks and valleys, I think, is super, super key, because they're not going to go away. We're like inherently energy beings, right? At least that's what I believe.
Feelings of inadequacy, in my experience, come from our parents. I often talk to people about things that happen in their lives, and I relate it back to their sales all the time. So I'll give you a good example. The first one I'll give you 3 here real quick. The first one is my own example. I often feel a sense of inadequacy or that I'm not good enough. And that stems from my father spending most of my childhood constantly telling me I wasn't good enough. So when that happens, it translates into our day-to-day routines, professionally and personally. And that feeling constantly looms, and it affects everything about our lives and how we interact with others. Was this good enough for my executive producer? Was it good enough for my CRO? Was it good enough for my founder or my CEO? Was it good enough for my wife? Did I meet my kids' expectations? This translates quite well into everything that we do. Here's another one, though. And I ask this question to salespeople a lot when we talk about their career growth and the path that they choose. I'll say, hey, are both of your parents still alive? And they stop me all the time. And they're like, I don't know why that's relevant. Let me tell you why. If both of your parents are still alive, you haven't had that traumatic experience of losing one of your parents. That turns the volume down on almost everything else in your life. The same thing happens if you lose a child. These things turn the volume down on the importance of things like your job and your role. Not that they're not important. They're still important. They're key pieces of who you are, what you do, and how you're going to grow. But they're not as loud or important on the priority list as they once were, once these traumatic things happen. Here's the last one. Are you an only child? When you talk to salespeople that are brand new SDRs, oftentimes they've come from interviews where somebody has said to them, don't worry, this is just a stepping stone. This is just a starting point. This is just a foot in the door. We're setting these people up for failure. And the reason is because, especially if they're only children, they've spent most of their lives with two people, their parents, that only care about how they benefit from every situation. The expectation is that my leader is going to act as that parent did. And they're going to care about my professional growth and development like my parents would as an only child. But they don't. And we, because we don't have any siblings, have never had to wait in line or wait our turn for anything ever. We've never had a hand-me-down, right? If you have siblings, you've spent your lifetime waiting your turn. You know this game. You know it takes time. You know that somebody else is more important than you because you got told that for most of your life. These types of histories and backgrounds impact how we act as professionals, as humans, and as a society at large with all the other strangers that come in and out of our lives on our day-to-day basis. Unless you're working home like me and George do, and then you probably don't see a lot of people.
Well, wow. I love that. I'm sort of speechless there because I really want to dig into that, and I'm gonna have to rewatch this and really contemplate. I really appreciate that. I mean, I'm an only child, and now in my 40s, I think a lot about the impact that has had on my professional career, but also just like my relationships in general.
Yeah, right? It impacts everything that we do. What I learned, and I'll go back to that peace, what you really wanted was peace. I wanted the same thing. I wanted two things. I wanted peace and I wanted happiness. Major change had to happen in my everyday for me to achieve those things in my life. One of the key ingredients was time management. I was really bad about this for a long time. And then when I realized that I really loved sales and I really wanted to do this with my life forever until I couldn't do it anymore, I was like, okay, if I'm going to get good at this, time management has to become something that I am an expert at. So now, fast forward 8 years now that I've been in SaaS sales specifically, my calendar would give someone a seizure because of all the color coding. But every moment of my day, planned. There's no surprises. And any one of my colleagues, peers, coworkers that has access to my calendar can ask themselves, where did James spend his time today? And look at my calendar. And if it's not there, it didn't happen in my life. All my personal, all my professional, everything ends up on my calendar. And if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist. Sorry.
As a salesperson, how can I use that framework that you just talked about to better organize myself, right?
Yeah. The best skill that I can give you is to look. You have two spots which are ideal for planning. The first spot is a Monday morning. Look for your gaps. You have a week planned. There's already stuff on your calendar. Look for the gaps and match it up with the tasks that you know you have to do this week. line up those time blocks with those tasks so that you've allocated time that is no longer available because you'll be doing those tasks. Sometimes these are pipeline related tasks. Sometimes they're admin tasks. Sometimes they're data tasks. Color code your shit so that you know at a glance, where is most of my time going to be spent? I'll give you a hint. Anything that has to do with generating revenue should be green. If you're looking at your calendar in colors and you don't see a lot of green, time to take a step back and look at what you're spending your time at, right? Because green is your goal.
Awesome. Let's talk real quick about cold calling. I know this is a big deviation, right, from what we were talking about.
No, it's not actually, because you have to block off time for cold calling.
Well put. Well, let's talk about that. Like, how do we do that right now in 2023 with, and I think when I hear cold calling, I think cold emailing, cold outreach,
cold messaging. Right? Yeah. So let's talk about 3 facets of cold messaging, and we'll start with cold calling. My belief is that the most impactful, perfect thing that you can work on as a seller in 2023 when cold calling is your tone. This is a hard thing for salespeople to dial in. The sound of their voice, their inflections, the way that they use downward and upward tones when they speak, it's extremely complicated and difficult, and it takes time and practice and repetition to get it right. Let's give you an example. And this one comes, big shout out to Chet Holmes. If you don't know who Chet Holmes is, read The Ultimate Sales Machine. This book changed everything for me when I was doing door-to-door sales and B2B door-to-door sales in Florida and in Tennessee. So Chet Holmes talks about your tone and a downward inflection. If you're reaching out to gatekeepers, oftentimes we have this terrible habit of being like, "Hi, I'd like to speak with George, please. Please." This is a desperation in your tone. Most gatekeepers are trained to default to what they're trained to say. "I'm sorry, George isn't available right now. I'll take a message and get back to you, or I can transfer you to his voicemail. Which one would you like?" Right? And I can spit that out just so easy because I've heard it 1,000 times. So here's the way that you should ask the question. The gatekeeper answers the phone. "I speak with George, please." There's a downward tone in my voice, but I am authoritative. So I have a larger shot at that gatekeeper hearing that tone and going, "One moment," and saying, "Hey, George, someone's on the phone for you," and they sound really serious, right? When George answers the phone, I can be playful. I can change my tone again. But that gatekeeper is my first goal. Here's another stop. Sometimes they default. "Sorry, George isn't available." They don't really care how authoritative you sound, right? In this moment, you have to change to be an amicable human, somebody that's approachable to that gatekeeper. Stop the conversation. "George isn't available. I'll pass you through to his voicemail, or you can leave a message with me. Which one would you like?" "I'm sorry, what's your name?" "I'm Charlotte." "Hi, Charlotte. My name's James. Do you work directly for George, or do you work for a group of people at that office?" "No, I've worked for George for 30 years. "Oh, you're probably the best person I could talk to, Charlotte. What I want to do is put time on his calendar, but I know that you probably hold the keys to that. What would you suggest for getting in front of George today?" You are now creating an ally out of this person who, let's be frank, most of your leaders will tell you is a barrier or an obstacle. These are human beings. Slow your roll. Talk to them like that. You'll find you get more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
You were absolutely right when you said it's not a deviation from what we were talking about. And I think that's one of your special qualities, right? Like how you just really bring that human component or that that humanity to everything that you're doing professionally and how you're coaching folks. Now from a like channel perspective, you just hear about it all the time, right? Like any sort of preferences, should we still be cold emailing these days?
Absolutely.
Even though
absolutely right? Email will never die. What's changed, and yet it's the same, is the way we treat our email. So here's my theory, and I've had this theory for a couple years now, and it rings pretty true if you look at where my engagement comes from in my sales process. So my theory is that for the last, let's say 25 years, to be generous about my age, for the last 25 years, we've affiliated our inboxes, our email inboxes, with work. Most people avoid work. That's why thank God it's Friday is so crucial, right? Everybody's like, "Oh, TGIF," right? We don't like work. We avoid work. Well, if we associate our inbox with work, then we will naturally have a negative brain chemistry reaction when we open our inbox. The other thing that's happening is, so 25 years of conditioning has conditioned us to not like email right out of the gate. Forget about who's sending it to me, right? Right out of the gate, we're like, oh, I got to open my inbox. Inbox 230. Oh, it's going to be a long day, right? We say these things. These are real things that
totally
say, right? Here's the other thing that's happened is that we have found a common thread. Here's the common thread we all share, even if you don't know it. When you come into work in the morning and when you come back from lunch, you open your inbox and you scan. When you scan, you're looking for two things. You're looking for stuff that's automated, and I don't even have to open it to know that, and it gets a checkbox. And then you're looking for things that got sent from people I don't know that I didn't expect, and those things get checkboxes. And then you scroll up to the top and you hit what? The trash can. All that stuff goes to the trash, and what's left is the shit we actually want to read. Everybody does this if you're a human being. If you are not a human being, please get off this webinar, this show right now, because you are not being honest with yourself about how you look at your email. What does it mean? What it means is those subject lines and those previews have to scream, I wrote this for you. Specifically, your role, you as a human, something I found out about you or your company. It has to scream, this is not a robot. Or it's going to get the checkbox and it's going to get deleted. Not getting your email. It's not how do I get someone to open my email? How do I get them to reply? It's how do I get them to not delete me?
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah. But let's talk about the other side of the coin, because I'll tell you the truth. Most of my responses are coming from LinkedIn DMs these days. They're coming from social DMs like Instagram and Twitter. And I'll be, or whatever, what is it called now? X, I guess. Right? Yeah, X. Whatever it's called now. But they're coming from there. Why? One, what I mentioned earlier, 25 years of conditioning in our inbox has us wanting to talk elsewhere.
Yeah.
Negative chemical reaction in the brain. Let me get through my inbox really fast so I can look at shit I actually want to look at, right? That's like how our minds work. Then what happens? We can be super personal on social media platforms. Our society has deemed it that it's not unusual for us to cyberstalk. There was a time when this was like big no-no. People were like, social faux pas. Don't come to my MySpace page and stalk me, right? That was like something people actually were like offended by.
Yeah.
How dare you come look at my stuff, right? Now it's almost like second nature, especially for sales and marketers, right? We are like expected to go and do our homework and research our prospects, but that's not what we're doing. We're stalking. When you do this on social, plus the emails, plus the voicemails and the calls, it's really hard to ignore me. And that's your goal. Not just don't ignore me, but be excited to talk to me. You know how many people I cold call and when they finally answer, they're like, I feel like I already know you. Yeah, well, you've heard my voice every day for the last 5 straight days. Number one, you've gotten my emails. I can see that you're opening them. So my tones and the way what I want to talk about is probably fairly clear, right? My subject lines are pretty straightforward. So I know that about my outreach. And I've hit you on social and sent you a video there. So I would hope that you feel like you know me. All this does is grease the wheels for them to feel attached to you. And attachment is always what's going to open the door for conversation and let the drawbridge down so they drop their guard.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for that. You know, like, boy, I could just like continue to hear you all day, all night. I got to see you in person at some point soon, man. Yeah. We got, you know, you owe me a hug.
I do. I owe you a bear hug, buddy.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about Sell Better and some of the stuff that you're doing with the organization.
It's gone way beyond Sell Better. So Sell Better is actually only the first of many shows that are happening right now. Very excited about this. Market Better went live for the very first time yesterday. Jack Kosakowski hosted Devin and Eddie, and they talked about newsletters. Market Better will be live once a week. We'll be talking about marketing things. We've already been talking to Sell Better is live every day. So we've been talking to salespeople all this time. Well, there's no reason why we can't talk to marketing people too, because that alignment is historically one of the most difficult things for teams to dial in. I don't give a how big your company is, right? It can be small, it could be huge. It doesn't matter. Marketing and sales, tension, right? So we want to have 2 shows that represent both sides of this fence so that we can start talking about it on a regular basis. Here's another thing I'm really excited about. I'm about to start going live this fall. So stay tuned, y'all. Stay with me. I'm about to go live at 6 a.m. Eastern time, once a week at least, so that we can start changing the culture difference, the sales culture differences in places like APAC and EMEA that are often behind on what it takes to sell into the American economy. We want to bridge the gap. And we want to start talking about these differences. Is small talk as popular in the UK as it is in the US? Let's find out. Let's talk to people that sell in those regions of the world and really open it up. One of the best examples of this that I can come up with is that I spend a lot of time in West Africa, in Ghana. And when you go there, the way that they sell is extremely high pressure. So I have to step back with them and say, hey, stop. Right? You yelling in my face all the time is not going to make me buy your artwork any faster. Right? Let me give you a tip. And I give them a tip. And then they're like, oh, that makes sense. And we change something about the way they sell. Right? And this is going to be very exciting. I'm super amped for all that Sell Better is coming out with. Check it out. Learn more at sellbetter.xyz and go get those resources that I dropped. There is a ton of great value in those resources.
Awesome. Well, everyone, we'll go ahead and post the URLs to the resources in the channels that we're promoting this episode. Of course, YouTube, Spotify, LinkedIn, and Twitter. James, my brother, Saywhatsales, Buckley. Say what? Love you, man. Hugs.
Love you too, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for always breaking out some time to do these things. I know you're super busy, so it means a lot to me.
It's what it's about, man. This is family.
Absolutely. Familia.
Familia,
oh, brother. 305, right?
That's single for life, bro.
For sure, man. Well, listen, big hugs and have a great day.
You got it, man.